All right, friends, the Unbuilt It podcast this week, a little bit different than what we've done in the past. I'm doing a short intro for you because I've got a big announcement for you. As of the first of the year, the Unbuilt It podcast, which of course, Jake, Steve, we've known Peter for years, contributors to the Build Show Network. The podcast will be available, of course, in all the other locations you've seen it, but it'll also be added to the Build Show Network podcast. We're kind of adding a few of our contributors' podcasts, and the Unbuild It will be the very first one we've added besides the Build Show podcast. Super excited about that. And this week's podcast episode is actually kind of a relook. I was the guest on, I can't remember, it was episode 8 or 9 on the Unbuild It, way back when. Even before I think the Build Show Network was a thing. These guys have been podcasting a lot longer than I have. So anyways, we're going to be rewinding time a little bit and replaying that. And as of the first of this brand new year, I want to invite you guys to listen to the Unbuild It podcast on the BuildShowNetwork.com as well. With that being said, happy holidays. Wish you guys a fantastic New Year's, and I'll look forward to seeing you at Build Show Live in just a few short months.
Welcome back on Build It podcast listeners. We're live here today, and we got a surprise for you. Yes, at the last podcast at the end, I wasn't feeling positive vibes with Peter Yost anymore, so I temporarily fired him. And he is out of the picture. Today,
down the drain.
Today, we have a special guest, Matt Reisinger. Some of you might know him. And Matt is here. And not only is he here, but this is kind of an interview process for the new potential seat.
Steve,
on
audition take.
I didn't realize this was going to be audition, Steve. I would have probably taken this more seriously had I realized. Especially because this is a paying position, isn't it?
It's, yes, very well paid.
That's what I thought.
Peter's out. So we just recoup. That's like getting rid of the all-star, first baseman. He's out. So now we have some money for talent.
Love it.
Plenty of room in the team budget.
Like $3.2 million annual.
Listeners, before you get too much in an uproar, Peter's not out. Peter's just on the bench today, and we're very fortunate to have Matt Reisinger from Reisinger Build Show Network, all the above here joining us today to give you guys some insight into his world, and we'll try and play nice here.
Thanks for having me, guys. Sure appreciate it.
And I think that while most of the people that have found us organically probably know who you are, Matt, but why don't we start with you, introductions, and why don't you tell us how you got into this business in the first place?
Yeah, sounds good, Jake. So I'm a builder in Austin, Texas. Been here in Austin for 15 years now. That's when I started my own company back in 2005. Prior to that, I'd been building for 10 years for other people. Got my start as a 22-year-old with a big national builder working in Washington, D.C. And then after getting married a couple years, we decided to move with my wife's job out to Portland, Oregon. And I moved from working as a production builder to a semi-custom builder in Portland. I learned a ton about a whole different climate moving to Portland. And shortly after I moved there, the kind of big national
rain
and the big national mold crisis hit us. And we were caught severely flat-footed building fairly leaky houses, unfortunately. And so kind of got thrown into the mix with attorneys and industrial hygienists, and we had to buy back some houses, and we also built some houses with EIFS, kind of a face sealed, really bad fake stucco system. And so in that kind of crucible, I started learning building science and getting more interested in building better houses that were frankly not going to get me as a builder sued. And then when I moved here in 2005, I started my custom home building company. And here we are 15 years later, and I've hit the pinnacle. I've been on the Unbuild It podcast. So I think I'm going to go ahead and retire this year. Hang up the boots. What do you think?
This is what we've all been working towards.
It's the big show right here, guys.
Go ahead, Jake.
Okay, sorry. I like the fact that when we're on a podcast, we forget that we're all laughing and nobody's talking, and it's just dead air for everybody. So did you go to school to get into this, Matt?
Sort of. My construction background starts in junior high. The church I went to as a young kid got me as a seventh grader working out on job sites in Pittsburgh for inner city people, generally older people, elderly, that own their own houses in Pittsburgh where I grew up, which was like gorgeous mansions that had been abandoned by the rich people that built them when Pittsburgh kind of had this white flight into the suburbs. And so we had this really interesting ministry that we got involved with as a junior. I got to go as a seventh grader, where we got to repair these old houses for elderly people that owned the house but couldn't afford to maintain them. So I was rebuilding front porch decks and painting and doing all these interesting things on houses as a seventh grader, which coincidentally was when I started watching This Old House. And I didn't know anybody in the building business. My dad was in the steel business, worked for U.S. Steel for many years. And so through my kind of junior high and high school years, I did that. Then when I got into college, I loved it, and it was so satisfying to see these houses go from one of them in particular, I remember, was a condemned property. And we ended up getting it uncondemned by the city after doing some serious extensive repairs. And so in college, I studied industrial engineering and thought I wanted to work for a manufacturing company. But when I was a senior interviewing for jobs, this is before the internet, I couldn't figure out how to get a job at Toyota. And instead, a big national home builder came recruiting in college. And I didn't sign up for the interviews. I thought, I don't want to be a builder. I don't know any builders. I can't imagine I could have a career as a carpenter. That was kind of my only assumption as a builder. And so this national builder came to interview on campus. I went to their night before the interviews talk that someone invited me to, like, here's what the job looks like. And as these guys were talking about their job, I instantly was like, whoa, I had no idea this wasn't even an option. I didn't know any builders growing up. And so I went up after the interviews and said, guys, I don't have a slot for tomorrow, but you got to get me in. I was born for this. This sounds incredible. And
what was the thing that those guys said that I assume, like, if you were thinking about going into being a plumber, the plumbers on the job would talk you into doing it because you could get a boat. But what was it that the guys that were already working for them, what was their sales pitch that brought you in?
Yeah, the big sales pitch for me was lots of responsibility and no office. And I really enjoyed those things. I liked working outdoors. I liked construction. I love the idea of having a pickup truck as an office and having the responsibility of lots of houses under construction, because I loved construction, and that they would train me to be a real builder. You know, up to that point, I'd just been trained to be a handyman and fix plumbing and do painting and do all these things that I enjoyed. But I certainly didn't know how to build a house and had never done any framing work. But so this company was basically saying, look, we'll give you 10 houses to build at a time. You get to manage the process. And by the way, you get a pickup truck and you get a job office and you get the freedom of
a cool truck and a laptop.
Yeah. Well, no laptop back then. A pager is all I had in 95. No computer, just a pager. In fact, I remember
Jake, a pager is that little device that goes on your side and somebody calls it and it buzzes and it gives you a phone number. You have to
I've
call
seen
it
movies. I've seen it in the movies. I remember it in the movies.
Steve, do you remember going from a regular pager to a alphanumeric pager when you could actually get a message on your pager?
Yes, I remember that. I remember working the very first Motorola cell phone, the Brick,
yeah,
it was
baby.
called.
The Brick
The
phone,
battery in that was literally the size of a brick.
Those are awesome. I never had one. One of the project managers I worked for had a car phone, and I remember being on a call with him in the car one time. Like, whoa, he's like an astronaut.
Okay, then I'll share the cell phone story. I'm second generation in this company. My dad was the first person I knew that had a cell phone, and I thought that was really cool, and it was neat for his business that he was going to have a cell phone. We were going to be able to get a hold of him during the day and everything. And he stuck it in his breast pocket the first day he got it, and leaned over to clean drywall tools, and it dumped into a bucket of water. And he took it to the cell phone carrier and said this thing fell in a bucket of water, and they gave him a loaner phone. And I remember that he still had that loaner phone like 6 years later. He never went back to get the actual repaired phone. He just kept the one that they loaned him.
Hey,
I was like, well, I guess if it works.
I got my own cell phone story. So back in the days of the brick, right? I told you, everybody knows I was in the Marine Corps. Well, I used to drive the general and admiral around. Well, that's where we had the cell phone. So it was my first time I ever had a cell phone, and I was young and naive. So I was like, hey, man, this is cool. I'm living in Hawaii. I'm sitting in this car. I got this cell phone thing. Let me call all my buddies. So I started calling all my buddies back to Massachusetts from Hawaii, calling them all the time,
With the cell
chatting it
phone
up
bill?
on a cell phone bill. About 4 weeks later, the captain, the general's aide, comes over and says, hey, by any chance, have you been using that cell phone? And I said, yeah, I might have a little bit. He said, a little bit? We got about $1,600 in phone calls here. That's a little bit more than a little bit. So he's like, let's not let that happen again. I was like,
Let's not do that anymore.
That was the last time I used that for personal use.
Oh man,
Anyway, it was fun nonetheless.
It was like
$1,600.
$1.50 a minute for long distance charges too, or something. I remember back in the
Yeah,
day.
I just got to get this out. Just so you know, Matt, Jake's first cell phone was a Samsung Galaxy 8.
When he was in junior high.
Yeah.
I love you both. Okay,
funny.
so they sold you. You went to work for that builder. How long were you there?
Gosh, I worked for those guys my first 7 years out of school. So from 22 to 29 years old. And I started as an assistant superintendent out on the job. And to their credit, they gave me a 1 year training program that was really good. But they were building junk houses, man. I mean, I just didn't know any better because I was a 22-year-old and I was used to working on 100-year-old houses. So I just didn't have any frame of reference for what a well-built house was. But I worked my way up through the company to superintendent was what we called our field managers. And then I went into HR and recruiting. I recruited people out of college for a little while. That was a really valuable job, especially now as a owner who's recruiting people to come work for me. It gave me some good, valuable skills in interviewing and finding good people. And then they moved me into sales, and I sold new homes for a little while. And then when I left them, I went to a builder in Portland, Oregon that hired me as a kind of a project manager, where I had 4 or 5 superintendents underneath me. And the best thing that happened to me was I had warranty underneath me. And so anything that was above kind of the general warranty issue got escalated to me. And that's where I really got into it. Cause
That's invaluable.
Within that first month of joining that company, that's when they got hit with lawsuit after lawsuit on mold issues and EFIS and some other stuff. So instead of managing the construction managers, what I was hired to do, I basically managed the lawyers and the risk management. And to that builder's credit, he's about 10 years older than I am. So at the time he was probably early 40s, getting sued by multiple people. He radically changed his building practices and went from building a leaky sieve building to we were the first builder in Portland to integrate rain screens on all our builds. And at the time we ended up.
And what year was that?
That was 2001. No, 2002.
Okay.
Pardon me, 2002. Yeah, 2002. In Portland, Oregon.
And we're still having that argument about rain screens on a national level.
Can you believe that? It's crazy. It's crazy. Well,
one of the things I find really interesting about your chat here, Matt, is, quite often because of the platforms and the way our lives are organized today, people look at people and say, oh, wow, look at Matt. I want to be just like Matt. But they don't realize that Matt has been Matt for, the last 15, 20 years doing a lot of things that allowed Matt to be Matt. And the thing that I commend you on in what you're saying here is that it seems like you took every opportunity and turned it into something positive, right? You could sit there and say, oh, I'm going to build porches. Oh, I'm going to, stupid contractors got me demoing it, this building. Well, when you're demoing it, take the time to understand, how is that building failing? Is there any water stains? What's happening in that building? Turn that demo into an education.
For sure.
If you're a young builder out there or aspiring contractor wanting to do better, then you really need to think about every moment and how can I make that moment a positive moment in my life, which is pretty much what you're talking about here, which I commend you on.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I
really feel that every builder should have to spend a few years remodeling before they're allowed to build new.
I was just going to say that,
or
Jake.
remodeling and repair.
I was just going to say that. I learned so much demoing those houses. Well, not demoing, I should say remodeling new houses that were, year-old, some of them not even 6-month-old houses, and finding out where the issues were on these relatively new houses. And coincidentally, at the time, I was also remodeling my Sears and Roebuck house that I bought in Portland, Oregon. That was a roughly 1930s house, and seeing what problems it did and frankly didn't have on that house. In an incredibly rainy climate. So the remodels over the years have taught me so much. And that same is true when I moved to Texas and started doing some remodels here, seeing how Texas houses fared. And it also showed me that climates are very different. And that was something I really had to struggle with when I moved to Texas. Like, why is it different here in Texas than Portland, Oregon, or Washington, D.C.? And when I moved here, I fairly early on did a couple remodels on houses that had Visqueen vapor barriers on the inside, and found a lot of problems with that. And I had to really kind of wrap my brain around, okay, why were there issues with these houses that had these vapor barriers that I was used to doing all the time in DC? It was code, I was required to do it, but I never really thought about why. And then all of a sudden it's not working in this climate. So why am I having these problems? And again, it was building science. It was Joe Stiebrick. It was, all those resources that I had to kind of delve into to go, all right, how is Texas a different climate zone? And how am I going to build down here now that I'm in this new place differently than where I've built either in DC or in Portland, Oregon?
And what was your introduction to building science? Like you said, those things led you to it, but what was like the one thing that you found something online, you had somebody go, oh, you ought to look at this guy, or what was that first thing that kicked you into being interested in building science?
Yeah, interestingly enough, Jake, probably the very first time I ever heard that word was at an EBA one-day session that I went to in 2002. It was during that same kind of mold crisis time where we were trying to figure out like what's going on with these houses. And at the time, DuPont was sponsoring a ton of that type of building science work because we were using just kind of whatever was off the shelf when it came to waterproofing and really trying to face seal everything, caulk it in tight so no water can get by. And so I went to this EBA conference, and it was actually Marc LaLiberte that was teaching that day. And I've heard him many times since. But it kind of blew my mind. Was it one of their
houses that work?
Houses that work or works, something like that. Yeah. It's a great one-day intro to building science.
Yeah.
Steve, houses that work.
Yeah, houses that work. Peter was actually one of the founders of that. He's the one that helped set up and organize that whole program.
So valuable.
Peter Yost did.
And Steve, I know you and Peter have been doing something kind of similar with Huber on their road show, kind of a one-day.
Yeah, we have a series seminar that's called Home Building Crossroads, and we travel around the country, go to different various cities. We did get to go down to beautiful Texas a couple times and hit Austin, Dallas, Houston. We bring a little building science. Peter brings some of the building science. I tease him and I say, Peter's going to teach you all about that ninth grade science that you didn't want to pay attention to in ninth grade. And we laugh, but it's in some ways I
is.
say it because it is a little true, right? I mean, physics and building science isn't really that hard. It's certainly
that's
not
right.
rocket science. It's building science, right? Keep it simple and pay attention. But Peter does just such a superb job. I mean, I've probably heard his talk no less than 50 times. And honestly, I still walk away with something
certainly better
after
than your
every time
part.
I hear him speak. Sometimes it's a headache, but sometimes. Thanks, Jake.
I can let you in on the top secret. Yeah,
Y'all can't see it, but-
see it, but he's using his hands to make gestures.
No, I was going to make fun
I
of your
can
shirt.
let you in on a secret because we know that this will publish after the fact. I'm starting a home building crossroads things with Huber as well. That'll be
Yeah.
not with Steve and Peter, but solo act where we do some hands-on stuff and we do some classroom style learning as well.
Oh,
So
man,
look
that's
for that.
awesome, Jake.
Published from Huber's home building crossroads as well.
Love it, man.
So-
That's fantastic. I love the series you did with Fine Home Building where you did a bunch of hands-on. In fact, I stole that for a video. Hopefully I gave you credit in the video, but I stole that for a window install detail video. I learned several things from you on that. So, man,
Well, thank
do
you.
that, man. That's great
That
stuff.
is a good series.
Very good series.
He also did that awesome series down at IBS with the other guy.
Booger?
What's his name? Ben Boogie? No, I know it's Bogey, but I just had to. I had
Ben
to
the
take
Beard
that
Bogey.
opportunity, Ben.
I think that's one of the things. I think the window installation is an easy one to talk about because no matter how many times you talk about it, there's somebody standing there that goes, "That's not the way we do it," and it's like, okay, but let's talk about why you do it your way,
And why this way?
or let's talk
might
about
be
it why the
better.
manufacturer is wrong.
Yeah, that's always good.
I have no problem saying the manufacturer is wrong. either.
Yeah, they are.
So you have that intro to building science, and then is that becomes part of your career at that firm? Then, if they're completely pivoting and changing the way that they're building houses,
Yeah, it really was. As we got more and more into building a more durable house, and frankly, a house that we wouldn't get sued by by handing it over to the clients, we ended up learning more about, at the time, what we referred to as green building, which unfortunately a bunch of greenwashing kind of led to that term dying, and I don't even use that term anymore. But it was building a durable house that was comfortable, that was air sealed, that had good mechanical equipment in it, that controlled humidity. All these things that we think of as high performance houses now, we were calling them green houses back then. And we probably focused a little too much on low VOC paints and some of those kinds of things back in the heyday of green building, as if that was a really pivotal moment. And
that was the solution.
that was the solution was low VOC paints.
It was a different paint.
But so anyways, we were one of the largest builders in that area to go for a top tier rating in that program, where previously we could cared less about getting into that program. So, I think most builders get into building science in a way to save their own bacon. And that was certainly me, and honestly still is me today. I build very high exposure houses with high exposure clients. And so I'm thinking every day about how I'm going to do these high exposure houses and high exposure clients in a way that's going to reduce my risk.
Yeah. So let's talk about you starting your business then, and how it started and what the first couple of years looked like.
Yeah, so when I moved here to Texas in 2005, I didn't know anyone. This is my wife's hometown. She was pregnant with our first kiddo. And when I moved here, I was actually living in my in-laws' basement for the first couple of months. So I had no job. I had a pregnant wife. My wife was working. And I was still trying to find myself. Like, how do I start a building company when no one knows me, when I don't know any subs? Here I am living in my in-laws' basement for a few months.
Yeah, and your office address is apartment D, the basement apartment.
Totally, it was terrible. And we ended up, we found a rental for a while, so I wasn't in their basement too long. Funny story during that time, though, her grandfather had passed away not too long previous, and I didn't have a car because my company car when I lived in Portland was a company pickup truck. And so I got her grandfather's 1988 LeBaron convertible in red. I was driving.
Did it have the white leather interior? It did. Yeah. Yes, that's
And
perfect.
a couple of
That didn't say used car salesman all across it, did it?
Oh, it was bad. And here I am driving that around town, like going to meetings and like talking to people about my new home building company. Oh, it was terrible. So
I think you underestimate how many people started their construction company out of a Chrysler LeBaron convertible with a ripped soft top.
yeah, I'm not the only one. I'm sure there's many. So
I'm sure there's somebody now starting one out of an 88 Chrysler LeBaron.
it's a 98, hopefully not an 88 at this point.
Okay, sorry.
But yeah, let's just say my ego was a little bit in the tank. So I definitely was starting at ground zero. But so here I was in Austin, Texas. It was a good market. 05, Austin was booming. And you know, again, I'm trying to figure out like, how do I start a company when no one knows me? And I had a little bit of money in the bank because I'd sold my Sears and Roebuck house that I'd done pretty much a full remodel on nights and weekends. I had no kids, so nothing better to do than just work on my house on the weekends. So I made a nice chunk of change, and that was my nest egg to start the company. Within a month or two, I did end up buying a used truck, so I didn't have to drive the LeBaron anymore. And I got an investor. I talked to basically a family member into helping me purchase a lot, hire an architect. I hired this guy, Peter Pfeiffer, fairly well-known architect who goes...
That's a decent first spec architect.
Yeah. I knew that he knew building science and he knew how to build in Texas, and I didn't. And so I hired him to do a spec house in a really prominent neighborhood right in town, 2 miles from the Capitol. And so I started this spec house and was trying to figure out what subs do I use. And Peter was a big help, I got to say. I mean, he helped me get turned on to lots of good subs. He introduced me to a couple good builders in town who were, 15 years older than me, and several of them kind of became early friends and mentors to me. And I built that house. And then at the same time, I started building a second house. I got a second investor involved. And that second house was with a totally different architect who didn't get building science at all, but he was really good at modern architecture. And that house got on the AIA Homes Tour when it was completed, and I was able to sell it under construction to a professor that was moving to town who really liked the style.
That's a nice one.
That was good, and that was really my big breakout moment, because this professor had some means, brought in a California interior designer that got rid of my terrible selection that I'd made with my interior designer and made it a good-looking house on the inside. And that architect did beautiful plans. They weren't particularly great from a building science perspective or a performance perspective, but they were pretty. And then that house got a bunch of press and got on the Homes Tour. And then that was around the time that I met. Let me back up a minute. I started with no partner. I brought on a business partner maybe a year or 9 months into the company because I was kind of I was worried about how do I find local subs, and I really should have someone who understands Texas. So I brought on this business partner, and that was a mistake. He was a great guy, but the recession hit in 07, and very quickly we were like, how are we going to feed both families? This is just not going to work. And here I had, thank God I'd sold my first spec house that I did with Varley and Pfeiffer. My second one was under contract and almost didn't close because the market was going down so badly. They were trying to renegotiate their price before closing, which was terrible. And
that
was bad.
Heartbreaking too.
And then I had started a third spec because this business partner and I were trying to get this business out of the ground, and so specs was the only thing we knew at that time. So here I started this third spec, but the third spec was in a not so great neighborhood, like a third tier neighborhood, shall we say. And I was going to put $1 million into this spec and try and sell it for like 1.3. Well, as the time ticked on, I lost the business partner because we couldn't pay both of us. And I finished the spec, and the months were just clicking by with no sales. The market was just zero. And I kept lowering my price and lowering my price. And finally, in 2010, I sold this house that I started in 07, and I sold it for a $250K loss. And also personally,
That is an enormous chunk of change.
a lot of change. And there's some good news and bad news in all this. The investor was a family member. And so I was able to say, hey, I can't pay you now, but I will pay you. So can you hold off on me making payments? Because the payments were like, $6,000 a month. And I didn't have that. And
they didn't disown
they didn't
you.
disown me. I paid the bank loan off with the $750 the buyer bought, and I ran my credit cards up to their max. So I had about $50K in credit card debt. So here I am, 2010. I've got 2 kids at this time, no business partner, $300K in debt that I owe people between banks and a family member. And now, though, I did have at least 1 or 2 finished houses and somewhat of a reputation. So I said, man, I'm not doing specs ever again. This is terrible. I can't afford the loss. And frankly, it's hard to convince a buyer of a finished house that they should pay more than the next house down the street because it's a better built house. Much, much easier to convince someone before you build a house than after that it's worth more. So I learned a lot of lessons. And so I ended up taking on a different business partner a few years later. But the key takeaway for me then was don't do specs. And I also learned, these architects in Austin in particular, which is a very design-oriented community, they'll refer me business if I show them that I won't X them out of the process, that I'll respect them as an equal partner in the
Be inclusive.
Exactly. And at that time, there weren't many builders that were doing that. It was kind of an anomaly that the builder wouldn't just say, hey, we got the plans, fire your architect. You don't need to pay them to come out on the job site and see anything. We're going to be just fine. And by the way, all these details that cost so much money,
We know what we're
let's
doing.
change that. We're not going to do that. We're going to do it cheaper. I can get this guy to do it for half that cost. And so I didn't do that.
That's brutal.
And I ended up, building a lot of great houses, and some I made some money on and some I didn't. But by 2015, I'd paid off 100% of that debt. And as of today, the only debt I still have a little bit to pay off on my main house. But that's it. And since that time, I haven't taken on, I've been really cautious about ever taking on any business debt, any equipment or tools we own. We only pay cash, or we buy them with a credit card, but pay it off. So I'm in a much
So I think that
different place.
actually, Matt, I'm going to interrupt you real quick.
Yeah.
I think that's, I actually had hoped that you would tell that story because you and I have talked about that story before. And I think that darn near every builder that's been in business for any decent amount of time has a story like that. We have a mutual friend that builds on the East Coast that lost $50,000 on a kitchen renovation.
Oh, yeah.
I myself lost $180,000 on one job because I did change orders on a handshake before I realized that somebody out there was going to try to screw me out of money, and they weren't just nice people that I was doing business with. And I think that that's an important thing to point out to people, and to know that there is a lot of risk, especially in that spec market that you're talking about. I mean, that's why we exist in the remodeling and new construction, because it's paid for.
For sure.
Either you have the money or you don't.
Well, it's not only builders. It's not only builders, Jake. I went through the McDonald's drive-through the other day, gave them a 20, expecting over $10 in change, and I only got $2.68 worth of change. They got me for $10, and I was already miles away before, so I couldn't go after them. So you're not the only one that was out with some
$10
cash there, buddy.
Thank you.
Us architects, it's not easy.
Thank you for sharing.
Oh, so sorry, Steve, for your
heartwarming,
loss.
Apocryphal tale that allows everyone to understand.
You're going to be able to pay your mortgage
But I
this
think
month,
it's a
Steve?
valid. It's a
We'll
valid
get
thing
by
that
it. We'll
like
get
we
by it.
look at, I'm sure that our listeners that know you already before our podcast look at you and go, oh, that guy's crazy successful. He must be doing everything right. They look at anybody that they follow on Instagram or is putting out YouTube videos and go, oh, that person knows what they're doing. They don't make mistakes. We all are still human.
Yeah.
We all still make mistakes. And I think the thing to realize is how you recover and how you handle yourself. And you were lucky enough that you had an investor that was a relative and you were able to get leniency that you might not have if you had borrowed money from the mob or something. But you took care of your business and you made the business a priority rather than just walking away. And that was the same thing for me. And I decided that I could problem solve all of the mistakes that I had made with the appropriate procedures and paperwork and contracts. And that I had operated in the same realm that people operated in the 90s in our market, where everything was just a handshake. And that was not the way of the world anymore. And that I needed to be better protected.
Yeah, I mean,
And I think also, credit to you, Matt, is you never gave up and you turned every one of those lessons into a learning lesson. So that the next time you went and did something, you didn't do it the way you did it the last time. So, you changed direction and got remotivated.
And now it sounds like Steve and I
moved on.
both owe you money and we're asking for leniency. We're just kissing up.
I wish I could say that was the last time I lost
so-
money. I've made some other pretty big ones as well over the years. And one quick story though to follow up on that, Jake, I would say, in the last big recession that we had in Austin, right before the recession hit, there was a builder in town that I really admired. He was a guy who was a few years younger than me, who seemed to be super successful. He drove a big fancy car. He drove like a Range Rover. Always dressed impeccably. He was the president of our builders association. I thought every time I saw he had built a fancy house for his family, every time I saw him, I was a little jealous. Like, oh, why am I still driving this 10-year-old truck? I'm such a loser. I still wear jeans and boots every day. I need to be more like this guy. And well, come to find out, when the recession hit, he had a bunch of spec houses. He was starting to rob Peter to pay Paul from paying clients to pay other jobs. And ultimately, he stiffed a bunch of people in town. And I'm not telling this story necessarily to throw him under the bus, although I am sad that he ended up doing that. But the point is, I've seen him a couple of times since, and he ended up having to move out of our city. He moved to another Texas town, and he's not even in building anymore. He's in like commercial construction. Whereas I didn't know how I was going to pay that back. I went to everybody that I owed money to and said, hey, including one of my subs, actually. I had one sub in particular, my HVAC contractor, that had a final bill that I didn't have the money for, and said to him, hey, look, we've worked together for 4 or 5 years now. I know you don't know me super well, but I will pay this back. And if you give me 3 to 4 months, I'll make every payment and I'll get you taken care of. And sure enough, I did. And that sub is still on my job sites today. And same with my investor. I told that investor, hey, look, I'm not going to be able to start payments for a little while, but when I do, I will pay this off. And, when I made that last payment in 2015, my office had a little party because we fired Chuck, our employee that we had to pay the last 5 years, but wasn't worth anything. And so it was a painful few years for me, but it's allowed me to maintain a reputation for having integrity, such that if something happens again and there's a problem, I'm able to then say to people, hey, look, I'll take care of this, whether that's, a sub, a supplier, whatever happens to be. And then the last thing is I've also really been cautious about taking on debt. And I think that's something that's really easy for us as builders to do, is to take on debt. So be really cautious about how quickly you grow, about what tools you buy, about what truck you drive. I'm driving my 12-year-old Tundra most of the time these days, because I'm wanting to make sure that I'm not going to have that new car payment if something changes.
I think that's a really valid point too. Our business has kind of grown in the same way. I do lease a building, but the building's only $500 a month. So can we even call that
Good for you. That's awesome.
Can we even call that an expense?
No, almost not. No.
And I have basically no equipment costs. I have one employee vehicle, and that's it. Everything else that we've ever purchased has been cash flow because I don't know what the economy is going to do. I don't know if COVID-19 is going to hit and all of a sudden we're going to be sitting at home. And while my business might be more profitable today, if I was willing to take on, multiple pickups with Aero Building on the side and a building downtown that has a cool office that encourages people to buy houses from us, those are all expenses that I'm not willing to risk in the long run. Should the economy turn?
Yep. Yep.
I actually had a really uncomfortable conversation with my guys the other day about COVID-19, and one of them said, well, what happens if both of us decide we want to stay home? And I said, well, I can do my office stuff in the evenings, and I can wear a tool pouch, and I can cover all the bills to keep the company open until you guys come back to work.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, that's an incredible position to be in. Now, it means that I'm only building 1 or 2 houses at a time. It means that I'm not grossing $4 million every year. It means that my income is more moderate than a lot of builders, but I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah.
I get to pick and choose what I do. I get to work with the people I want, and I don't ever have to say yes to a job because I have bills that I need to pay.
Boy, I've gotten into so much trouble over the years by doing that, Jake. Oh, I can think of seveal jobs
In
that I took
fact,
that I
I've said
have.
no. I said no to 2 houses and a decent sized remodel this month during an uncertain time in our economy, just because I could tell that the people that were asking were not people that we wanted to work for.
So smart.
And it's like, man, that freedom is incredible.
So smart. For sure, man. Love it. Love it.
So after, so you've grown a business, and part of the thing that I wanted to talk about, while so much of this podcast is focused on building science and the concepts behind it, we haven't had a ton of conversations about how to run a business. I wanted to talk to you about social media.
Yeah, for sure, Jake.
And I wanted to talk to you about your beginnings in social media and what made you decide to get into it, and what your plan was in the beginning and where it's gone from that initial plan too.
So 2005, I started my company, and maybe a year later, I went out to California for the Custom Builders Symposium. I heard this guy, David Meerman Scott, speak, who wrote a book called The New Rules of Marketing and PR. And in an hour-long speech, I was totally fired up about how to do basically free marketing for my company, which was what he was talking about. How do you market your business for free? And he wasn't using the word social media. That really wasn't a term in 2006. What he was talking about was starting a blog. Blogs were really popular back then. And so he said, look, instead of spending money on advertising, why don't you write once a week or twice a month, write a blog post about something that you're interested in and that will show you as an expert in your whatever industry you're in. And then you'll be shocked by how quickly people will find your blog. And then whenever someone Googles your name or your company name, they'll find these blogs, and you'll see that traction will be gained. So 2006, I started Matt Reisinger in the Green Building blog on blogger.com.
Is that still up?
It's taken down now. Maybe on the Wayback Machine you can find it, but and then after 6 months, somebody was like, "Hey Matt, check out this new thing called YouTube. You can borrow my flip video camera and upload videos to YouTube, and then basically embed that YouTube link as a blog post, so that now you don't have to write." And I was like, "Oh, this is great. I'm passionate about construction. I can talk about it, but I have a hard time putting it into words." And so I put my first YouTube video up in 2007. And around that time, I maybe started a Facebook page as well for my company, or maybe me personally, I can't remember. And so I was, once every 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks, I was publishing a video, putting a Facebook post out, and then putting that video up on my blog. And so, I've been doing this for maybe 7 or 8 months. So I've got, maybe, I don't know, 15 or 16 of these blog posts up, and maybe, 10 videos, let's say, or 6 videos. And I started going to meetings, and at the meeting, like a prospect meeting, that is, the people would be like, "Oh, Matt, it's so great to finally meet you." I'd be like, "What do you mean finally meet me?" They'd be like, "Oh, I watched all 6 of your YouTube videos last night. I loved how you talked about
all 12 minutes of shaky
Oh,
camera.
it was terrible. I was like, "Mr. Plumber, here, hold this camcorder, hold this flip video camera." I wouldn't even edit it. I wouldn't even like cut it. The beginning of the video would be like, "Okay, is it on? Are you ready? All right, let's go."
Is it recording? There's no light. I don't see the light.
Yep. So 2007, I made my first YouTube videos, and I would go to meetings after I had maybe 6 or 10 YouTube videos up, and I'd go to meetings with these prospects, and all of a sudden it was usually the husband would be like, "Matt, so great to meet you." I'd be like, "What do you mean good to meet me? Like, have we met before? Or like, how do you know about me?" He's like, "Oh, I Googled your name and your videos came up, and I watched 3 or 4 videos about the difference between Integrity and Marvin full line windows, or about why you like spray foam insulation, or about conditioned attics, or, whatever it happened to be." And so I got this early feedback that, like, view count doesn't matter. It's all about putting yourself out there and people getting to know you, and
Quality of
views. Exactly. And the beauty of video is that people can get to know your personality, and we make judgments pretty quickly about whether we like somebody. And we generally only want to do business with people we like, right? So if I look...
Steve made a face. I thought you were going to say... But
that's funny.
I was certain Steve was going to lean forward and say, "Then you have him on a podcast and you changed your mind."
So anyways, on the YouTube thing,
sorry, this is how it goes.
I tell people, hey, social media is not really about you getting 10,000 followers and being an influential person in our business. Certainly that can happen, and that's happened to me and to you guys as well. But the main purpose of social media is to put some of your work out there, put some of your personality out there, and let people know that people are actually that you're a person that they would want to do business with, and that you're smart, and that you understand what you're talking about, that you're passionate, that you have integrity, that you care, and that you're going to build them or design them a good house. And if you'll commit to doing social media for around 15 minutes a week, you'll see dividends for it. And that's all I did to start with.
I would say that I've sold one house from YouTube, and assuming the people that Steve and I are working with right now sign a contract, 2 from Instagram. I have no other advertising
that's great
that
man.
is that comprehensive or been that effective. I would say I enjoy the interaction on Instagram, and I spend less than 20 minutes a day on there.
Yeah.
So,
and I would say, even if you just spent 20 minutes a week, you would still see some results. Maybe not quite as much as what you've seen, Jake. Jake, you and Steve are active on Instagram, and that's made you. I wouldn't say that's made you. You're obviously smart people, and that's made you.
Thank you.
But the time invested will help you get to that status of being an influential person in our industry. And there are people that I would say are influential people in our industry who are not all that particularly, whatever.
Steve,
fill in the phrase Steve. There because they're on.
We're talking about Steve,
right?
Yeah, I mean,
it definitely wasn't Steve.
Ouch. Ouch. But we talked about that the beauty of having this access to information simply means that you have the access to really good information, and you have the access, unfortunately, to bad information and bad examples. And, you have to be smart enough to kind of, wade through it and pick out the information that you want to search out. And then you have some people, and I know he's going to kill me for this, but, you know, Peter, who's an absolutely huge wealth of knowledge, that's afraid to come into the, you know, year 2000. And I tell him, you know, give it that couple minutes every morning and put a post up there. It would turn things around.
Yeah.
You know, or just, I want to say turn things around because he's doing really well, but it would pay, like you said, it would pay
It's
dividends.
paid me dividends.
Certainly. And not only that, but the industry, I mean, to tap into Peter's mind, is as scary as it may seem, there's a wealth of knowledge in there.
That's another big one,
you know,
Steve.
every conversation I have with him,
that's honestly
I walk away with
that's
something.
a big reason why I loved starting my YouTube videos, because I had several mentors that had mentored me that were 15 years, 20 years older than me. A couple of them are retired now, and to think that their knowledge is gone and unavailable to the industry now is kind of sad. And so by making a video, it's a little selfish for me because I'm thinking that maybe my kids someday will be builders and they can go back and see how I did it, reap the benefit of it. But it also is to pay it back too, because lots of people invested in me. So if I can make a video that will be helpful to our industry and to other builders who can't buy me lunch like I did buying other guys lunch and picking their brain, well, so be it. And that's the beauty of your podcast too, right? Guys are going to be listening to this, and girls driving down the highway on vacation and on the weekends and going to work, and they're sharpening the saw. They're getting better at their job, listening to a couple, 3 old guys talk about some wisdom and some mistakes that we've made. And you guys are dropping that knowledge on a regular basis now on the Unbuild It podcast. And that's fantastic. And that's another medium besides video that people are using big time these days to educate themselves. And how awesome is it that they can subscribe for free on Apple iTunes? I listened to episode 2 this weekend on a run. I was out in my neighborhood for 45 minutes. I had you on 1.5x speed, and I got through the whole podcast in one neighborhood run. It was awesome.
Well, thank you for listening.
I prefer like 5x speed when I listen to Jake and Peter.
That's pretty.
I think
That's pretty hard to take.
I think the thing that we run into, especially with things like your YouTube channel, and we'll get into Build Show Network in just a second, people immediately go, oh, well, the manufacturers are paying him to talk about that. And while that might be the case, that, like, you know, Steve earlier said that he is involved with Home Building Crossroads, and I am, and your YouTube channel and Build Show Network, that doesn't mean that anybody's doing anything dishonest. And that doesn't mean that our intent is still not to educate, share, and create a better environment for everybody to work in. It just means that somebody's footing the bill. And I think that that's a difficult thing for the naysayers on online. I mean, as if there aren't enough naysayers in the world, they have to be online too to get past. And I think that the conversation about, well, okay, if you disagree with something that I've said, challenge it on its merit. Don't challenge it on the idea that it was sponsored content, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And ultimately everything's sponsored content, right?
Eventually.
The guys at Fine Home Building and Journal of Light Construction are not there because they enjoy it. They're also getting a paycheck. And that paycheck is ultimately paid by somebody.
For sure.
So, I mean, unless you're working for the government and getting a government paycheck, you know, there's some amount of sponsored dollars somewhere, but it's all about the integrity of the person. I heard you talk about that on one of the prior podcasts, Steve. You know, there's a sniff test, I think is what you said. And you can smell when people are honest and genuinely care about doing things, and you can tell when maybe it's really more about just pushing a product.
Yeah.
And I can tell you my YouTube audience knows that too. A couple of times I've made videos that were borderline, you know, salesy videos where I had to, you know, I had some sponsor, let's say, who wanted to really tell me how the videos was to be made.
Certain verbiage.
And those
things.
videos do terrible.
Yeah.
Exactly. If it's my own words talking about it and I genuinely think it's a good product, I can make videos all day, every day about it. If it's something that I'm like, yeah, it's all right, it's not great. Well, first of all, I don't want your dollars because I don't want to have to talk about your product. But but second of all, let me talk about it honestly. And that's pretty much how our contracts go these days. Is we say, look, if we're going to talk about your product in a sponsored video or whatever format, you got to let us have creative control over it, because we're going to talk about what's right and what builders need to know about it, and not what your sales sheet says we should talk about it.
And not every product solves every problem.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. I mean, every product has some kind of setback. And when we set out to do the Home Building Crossroads, Peter and I made sure that, when we were talking with Huber and the other sponsors, that, listen, we like you guys, we like your products, but just understand, not every product is perfect. And there's probably going to be times where we say, yeah, this is, a problem with this, but this is how we would solve that problem. And it's true of any product. Yep. I mean, every product we use, but for the most part, we would choose this because it checks most of the boxes, and that would be the one to use.
And I think, that,
totally agree.
Like we're all saying, that level of honesty is the thing that's the most important. It's the sniff test is important. So you've started your own business. You've started a YouTube channel. YouTube is starting to be good for you. You're active on Instagram. Talk to us a little bit, and this is a little self-serving because Steve and I are involved. Also, for the listeners, this isn't just a Matt Reisinger come and promote everything that you're doing and then leave. We're assuming that we're going to be able to wrangle you back for more in-depth conversation, but I think a good first conversation is just to tell us about everything. So tell us a little bit about the Build Show Network featuring Jake Bruton and Steve Basic.
Yeah, so about a year and a half ago, my COO's brother came to me, who had been in the media business, working for the IEEE, the International Electrical Engineers something Society. And he'd been there for 20 plus years. And he came into town and we met, and he said, gosh, Matt, your numbers on YouTube are incredible. Like, how much is YouTube paying you on ad share? And I said, and I showed him all the numbers. He's like, this is pennies compared to what they're making on you. And he said, secondly, what happens if YouTube goes out of business or, decides that they're no longer publishing videos about construction, they're only publishing videos about slime or satisfying things like my 14-year-old watches? And I said, oh, it's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. And so he laid out a whole business plan for me to basically make Netflix for builders. And very quickly I said, this is awesome. We've got to do this. And that's basically the genesis of BuildShowNetwork.com, Jake, where the idea is we could create our own website that's different from the rest of the educational websites out there. We're in kind of a new world these days where, generally speaking, I'd rather watch a video about something than read an instruction manual, than read an article about it. Not to say that I don't still subscribe to Journal of Light Construction and Fine Home Building. I certainly do. But for the most part, when it's time for me to get educated as a builder, I love going to video because video gives me a whole lot more data than a written article does with a couple photographs. And that's really, I think, been the secret of my success on YouTube, has been really good information presented in a format that's quite digestible in the way we digest today. And so Build Show Network, the idea was born. And then I said, all right, well, we can't just have my videos on there. That's just, that's lame. And I really wanted to be able to reach people in all different types of markets and different personalities and different building styles, all these things. And so I started thinking in my head, well, what if we had multiple contributors on this Build Show Network? And that's when I started thinking of you guys. And if you're not familiar with Build Show Network, we have 4 builders and 1 architect. And I'll give you a guess who that architect is. Steve Basic, the first architect.
Steve Basic, architect.
Again, he's raising his hand
Steve Basic, architect
during the podcast. Like people are going to see it. That's been a common theme lately.
And And of course, Jake, you're a no-brainer too to add to the
Thank you.
to the Build Show Network. You're one of the first names that popped in my mind. I mean, I've always learned something from you every time you've published an article and made a YouTube video. You're a natural-born teacher, like Steve is, like I am, like Brent and Jake are. Where you've been around the block, you've seen things, you've done things the wrong way, and you've corrected them. You've made mistakes, you've learned, you've researched. And so the idea on Build Show Network is really a group of wise educators that can help that next generation of builder, remodeler, architect gain some wisdom and not have to make the same mistakes that we've made. And then I think the other kind of interesting thing about Build Show Network, which is also true of my YouTube channel, is we also have a whole group of people watching that are interested in building their own house someday and want to look over the fence and see what the pros are saying. I've always said that's the reason why Fine Home Building Magazine is sold at the airport, not because builders are traveling and buying it, but because people want to know what the pros are. Yeah, there's doctors and lawyers and engineers and computer scientists and all these people that are traveling, and they're wanting to. It's the American dream to build your own house. I'm building my own house currently. It's the first time I've ever built a brand new house for my family, and it's like every day I get up, I'm giddy thinking about my house under construction and getting to walk through it and see it, and thinking about the stages coming up and the products I'm going to use and the processes. And ultimately, I'm planning on living there a long time.
Do we not legally still have to call it a remodel?
I just modified my permit, so I think I can call it
area. Okay.
It's a 1970s slab, if that counts.
Okay. Do we think there's anything still living underneath the slab?
No, I think it's all dead at this point. We're good. Okay. No more rats in there. And being able to, I worked with a local architect on the architecture of the Big A, and then Steve has come in and worked with me on all the details, man. And a little bit of news that I haven't announced anywhere until this podcast, and I haven't talked about it even on social yet, is I had Skylar Swinford run the numbers for me, and on first pass, it looks like we meet Passive House standards.
Wow, look at that.
So I need to decide if I'm going to go for certification, but
well,
it seems like it'd be stupid.
If you want somebody to train you on the air sealing, the actual hands-on part, not the theory part, I'll come down.
Then I can go down there.
That's good.
Actually, I wanted to ask you some questions about that, Jay, because honestly, I feel like I'm about 5 years behind you when it comes to air sealing. And
maybe
most
more.
of what I know is from watching you do Steve's details on your jobs.
Well, if you want to get nerdy, this isn't going to publish till late summer, so people have already seen it on your YouTube channel. You want to talk about it? Or is it better off the air?
Yeah, here's a question. Here's a question that I have been thinking about. Like, where my panel comes into the house, how do you air seal all those crazy wires and details? Like, should I have a sub panel feeding from another panel, so I just have one big wire to air seal? Like,
so you have your meter on the outside of the house is the wire from it to your panels, the only thing penetrating the air barrier, correct? Yeah. So then everything else is coming down an interior wall, so it doesn't really matter. Or it's coming inside the air barrier.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
So one wire at a time.
And then really anything that's penetrating. Yeah, I was just going to say that. So anything that goes through the air barrier needs to be one wire per hole, right?
Yep. Since this is my podcast, we can be, or not my podcast, a podcast that I'm part of. We can be slightly vulgar, and one of my project managers put it best. He said, "Think of air sealing wires and pipes and conduit as the adult content that your grandparent watched. It's one thing per hole."
Okay, I got the visual.
See, the scary thing is your grandparent and me are probably the same generation. That's the scary thing.
And I'm pretty close to being your dad as well, I think, Jake, to be honest.
You're not that much older than me.
Or
But
if-
go ahead. Sorry for everybody
If
that's
nothing else,
grossed
I'm
out.
your
now.
much older brother.
You will never forget that rule, though. Now, that project manager
No, that
said
is
that,
true.
and I thought if I say that to any subcontractor, A, they're going to think it's funny, but B, they are never going to forget that rule. As
That's
silly
true.
as it is, they
That's
don't
true.
forget it. So,
One thing in one hole. Got it.
no matter what it is. Okay, so what's
All right,
next? What's
good deal.
next on the Matt Reisinger list of conundrums?
I don't know, man. We hit a lot so far. We're an hour in, right?
Yeah. We are. Yeah,
Yeah,
hour
we're
and
every
5
bit of
minutes,
that.
something like that. Okay, well, I think that if this seems to you, Steve, like a natural place, I think that I'm guessing we can wrangle Matt back for another episode since he's our boss, and this helps promote.
Oh, yeah.
This helps promote Build Show Network and his YouTube channel if we let him talk about it.
Heck yeah. You know
And-
it. I like to promote.
I would say thank you very much for coming on the podcast. You didn't have to do this. We know you're a busy man, even though you're stuck at home right now because there's no building going on in Austin. But thank you very much. Steve, do you have anything to add?
Yep.
No, I just a huge thanks, Matt. Greatly appreciate your time, your effort here. And thank you for your effort in the building
I
industry.
appreciate that.
You know, I'll throw out one shout out. It's more of a beef with the general public, but I get really frustrated when you put up a video on YouTube or something, and people want to spend 90% of all the comments talking about what was the cost per square foot of that project or how much did that cost. It's like get over it, and it's not that financial part isn't important, but we're really trying to get across some concepts here of building and find a less expensive way to do what we're saying and help us out. But right now, this is how we do things. This is the right way to do things. Good things cost money. Get over it and appreciate Matt's efforts for what Matt's trying to bring to the table. He's not trying to bring a $800 a square foot project to the table and say, "Ooh, look at me, I'm building really cool buildings." He's not doing that. He's trying to bring some sound education.
Thanks, Steve.
So take it for what it's worth and learn a little something.
Appreciate
there.
that, brother. Thank you. And same goes right back to you guys. You guys are cut from the same cloth. You care about doing it right. I've heard you guys talk about your progression and doing things better and better, and I feel the same way. Every building I build should be better than the last one.
And I would say the absolute best pro tip that I can give about that comment that Steve just made is if you look for any of Matt's YouTube videos that have myself or Steve involved with them, go to the comments and look for Steve in the comments if you want hours of entertainment of him battling against everybody.
Oh man, it's such a pet peeve with me. It's like the minute Matt does a video and he says, "Oh, the video's up," I go right in and I hit the comments.
Oh, you're so good at it, Steve.
And
I love
I
it.
fight right
I usually
back.
let him go.
I get a
cannot
phone call at 8
tolerate
o'clock
it.
on
I just let it
Saturday
go.
morning. And he goes, "Hey, did you read that?" And I'm like, "Did I read what?" And he goes, "I was just in the comments for like an hour and a half. Did you read any of them?" I'm like, "No, but I'm going to stop the rest of my day and go see what you had to say because I love it." He even defended me on Instagram today, and I was just like, "I'm not responding to that person." Steve's like, "Oh, I did. You should go and look." And I'm like, "Okay, thank you."
Oh, I love it, Steve. You're the best, man. So awesome, dude.
It's that
Okay.
fighting spirit.
Once a Marine, always a Marine, Steve.
We are going to say thank you
There
for
you go.
listening today, Matt. Thank you very much for being on the podcast. We're gonna
Definitely.
call this Matt Reisinger Part 1, and we're gonna have him back and talk business another time, I bet. So, thank you guys for listening. Until next time on the Unbuild It podcast, I'm Jake Bruton. Let's see if Matt
I'm
can do it
Steve
without anybody
Bazek.
prompting him to do it.
And I'm Matt Reisinger.
Have a good day, guys.
Dang it, I wasn't sure. All right, bye.
See ya.
See ya.